So at least if you get through the first 3 episodes, has the Donninger, right? So that might work. But otherwise, like The Expanse is a little bit too slow of a burn to be like, oh yeah, I'll give it like 3 episodes. Like, yeah. And it's too hooked in story wise for me to say like, go watch this one episode and it's gonna define the series for you and you're gonna get hooked because it also like it's telling an actual story, so it shifts over time, you know. So
what genre is it?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's definitely sci-fi, you know, because Honey, We Live in a Spaceship. Yeah. That's a reference that Her Majesty won't get. So
Honey, I Shrunk the Kids?
No.
What are you talking about?
When do they live on a spaceship? It's a
no. It's just like reference. That. You said it that way, and therefore that was my reference.
Yeah, that's it. That's her only reference. The word honey is Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. Not
so
even the
speaking
food.
Of movies that came out before you were born.
Not even the condiment food thing. Not Winnie the Pooh. Not just Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. Yes, right. That word.
No, it's So we watched Firefly. So apparently that's going to be this episode too. It's genres and all the pop culture references I can cram into a square minute.
Of course, that's your job.
Yes. Speaking of which, since I'll probably have to do this again on the Dresden one, I'm sorry I didn't remember the song for Boot to the Head. I could only remember the sketches.
Well, so that's the other thing. Genres, I looked it up and I said it, and everyone's still posting it like it wasn't mentioned. It's like I did work.
Yeah. Good job.
Good job, EG. You contributed in a meaningful way.
Right.
I always contribute in a meaningful way. It's just most people don't like the way I contribute.
Right. How dare you have opinions and not like 2 characters?
I mean, I saw some emails that don't think you contribute in a meaningful way.
Oh yeah, that's the other thing. Listen, you people want to complain about me, that's fine. Complain correctly. I'm the one who hates both those characters. There's not 2 separate people.
And I don't hate either of those characters. Like
that was my gripe with it as well. It's like, wait, both of those people are EG. It's the same person.
Right?
Yeah.
Like who do I hate?
I would like to be recognized for my correct opinions, not have them split up amongst the rest of you.
And I don't want to be confused with him. You send all your hate mail over there. I got my own hate mail. I don't need any help.
This email seriously brought me a lot of joy. And I love being called unprofessional.
Right. Yeah, and how dare we refer to you by your title?
Speaking of professional, welcome to while we weren't recording.
We made it through the 30 seconds. We can swear and spoil shit and stuff now, right? Yeah. Okay.
So fuck you for your wrong opinions.
Yeah, right. So we're gonna fight. I got the brass knuckles. No. Genres are stupid and unscientific, and I hate them. And Control is totally a horror game. So there we go. Yeah.
I didn't know what this game that you're talking about.
Plug our stuff.
Oh my god! I know it's only been out for a year, guys, and I'm usually the guy that's like, okay, if it's happened in 5 years, I don't know about it because I have children now. But go play it. It's fun. If you enjoyed BioShock or Half-Life or anything along those lines, if you enjoy light RPG and immersive storytelling type stuffs, then that's
my potato computer probably can't run it.
No, yeah, I played it on Xbox.
I think it even runs on a Switch.
Does it?
Yeah.
Do they have Control for Switch? I'm incredulous, but I'm gonna give you that one because I'm not gonna look it up. But yeah,
I'm pretty sure I saw it on the Switch store.
Like the song, you didn't look that up, and now look what happened.
Hey, you don't look up a lot of Dresden stuff because it's just in your brain. This was in my brain. It was just moldy from unuse because, as much as you guys don't care about my normal pop culture references from like the early 2000s, you definitely don't care about the ones from the 80s, like from when nerds were still uncool. Did
you read Ready Player One, Justin?
Yes. Yes,
was it just great for you the whole way through because of all the
no?
I've heard it's mostly the opposite. People who like that shit really don't like Ready Player One.
I enjoyed Ready Player One a lot, but
I really liked it. I didn't get much of the. I only got like maybe a third of the references, if that. But I enjoyed the book.
I was 80, 90th percentile there for sure, but I did audiobooks, especially because it's
same.
I was combining different names. I was like, Joss Whedon? No, what the hell? Anyway, so I should have slept more last night. But anyway, so Will Wheaton, he does the audiobook, and I hear it's fantastic, right? Do not listen to this audiobook, right? Like, he's great, but this is one of those books that you've got to skip shit, because I'll tell you what's not cool. Listening to an encyclopedia and listening to a scoreboard to the tune of 20 places, where 17 of the places are, bad guy 100578457 has 576,000 points. Bad guy 180543687 has nobody gives a shit. It's like, if that had been in the book, you would have taken one look at that, picked out your top threes, and moved on. But because it's an audiobook, he's got to read it.
Apparently, Ready Player 2 has gotten him on the cancel culture list now. Like, apparently,
really?
Like, very problematic with trans stuff.
I just know that I saw Daniel Green's review, and apparently it got into the actual really bad. He had read one other book that year where it's like, no, just no, terrible, and he put Ready Player 2 in there too as the one other book.
Yeah, so it's fan service, right? Like, it's targeted at an audience. Like, I'm in the right kind of audience. I think it was neat. Some of the stuff that they did, but it's not wildly original. And you can tell that, especially when what was the other sci-fi book, I guess, because they both could count different sci-fi genres, since that's what we're supposed to be talking about. But he did another one that was basically like Armada, is that what it was? Yeah, take a mashup of like The Last Starfighter and Ender's Game and a few other things, and mash those together. And that's the story we've got. And so, as far as the whole, the joke among writers and DMs that it's, if you steal from everyone, it's not plagiarism. It wasn't terrible, right? But it's maybe targeted at a slightly younger audience, so it wasn't amazingly sophisticated. And then again, like a lot of the tropes, like if you're too plugged in, it might just be like, oh yeah, okay, so this is lifted from there, and this is lifted from there, and this is, I started saying the same things. This is going to put me off on an island by myself where I belong. But with Discovery Season 3 was kind of the same thing. Like, they stepped up their storytelling game, but they also started stealing from, at least in my opinion, they were very much pulling elements and even scenes directly from other sci-fi movies. It's like,
I haven't seen the new season yet, but I've actually gotten it recommended, unlike the other ones where people are like, no, don't bother.
It's better than the rest, right? But it's not perfect, and that's kind of like Ready Player One is like, it's good, but it's not right. Without its problems,
Ready Player One, it's great because there's some really awesome scenes in the book.
Right? I listened to it, and though the scoreboard thing, it was annoying, but I still enjoyed it, and I even listened to it again. So I liked it.
And then you listen to Armada, which is also done by Will Wheaton, and you realize he has no range when it comes to doing audio.
I don't remember that being a complaint, but you're probably right. So for me, it was.
I would just say, if you don't enjoy the score thing, never listen to a lit RPG book.
Oh yeah, no. Yeah, why would you?
Because I did that because my roommate, he loves lit RPG, and these audiobooks are really good and stuff. And the character sheet stuff, I just wanted to rip my ears off. It was so bad.
So is this a thing? It's like choose your own adventure with character sheets? Like what's going on here?
No, lit RPG is basically, it's fantasy books usually, but it's gamified. So there are stats. The main character has stats. He can gain levels. He can gain professions. He can gain abilities.
Is this like Portal Fantasy where you go into the game like they have?
No, not necessarily. It's just sometimes, but sometimes the world just works that way. It's just that's how the world works.
Like Rune Lords. If that makes any of you
know,
that's
how the magic works. For example, that's just how it is. Books? The Land, the one that I talked about before, that I really disliked.
That's supposed to be terrible. Yeah. Okay.
It's supposed to be one of the greats of the genre, but I didn't like it.
But you don't like that genre, so yeah.
That's the only book I've tried from that genre so far, and I'm not sure I'm going back.
Can you write off a whole genre based on one book?
No.
Probably.
But
Sure.
I would probably say don't audiobook Lit RPG if they all, as I understand it, they read up stats a lot, and you're not, that's not gonna be.
So to tackle your question, if you're interested in the genre, then you should try a couple of other different things, right? Like if you're like, oh man, you know what Lord of the Rings was missing? Character sheets, then maybe you shouldn't judge it off of like the land, right? But if you're not really into vampires and BDSM and you read one of Anne Rice's novels, you probably don't need to go like, well, I really need to read a decent percentage. So I should probably read like 5 books before I make up my mind. No, yeah, you could probably ditch the genre by then, like I'm not into torture porn for movies and stuff like that, so I'm probably not going to give it an honest shake by watching more than one. I'll probably be like, yes, that's exactly what I expected this genre to be like. No thanks.
Justin saw one, and he was like, yeah.
No, I haven't even seen. Yeah,
Well, Saw 1 is completely different. Like the rest of the Saw movies, at least from what I've seen, I think I've seen through 5. Like 2 through 5 are just definitely torture porn, but Saw 1 is actually much more of a psychological thriller.
Yeah, no, the rest of them are like the people who saw the success of Saw 1 were like, oh, people like torture porn. I was like, well, no, they like the story that was part of it.
Right. And I've heard that, and it's almost gotten me to see Saw 1, but still no. But
I think Saw 1 is worth watching.
Like the Saw movies obviously are what most people come to mind, but for me it's like Hostel or movies like those. Like
even Hellraiser all the way back was.
I think I've seen the Hostel movies, and the thing that scared me the most about those was like I got a nagging suspicion that like there's something like this out there, and it scares me. Like that.
Yeah. Right. Well, and I mean that's part of it too, is that it's a little too real. Like if this is probably a shock to everybody, but I prefer escapism in my fiction. So like if I'm going to tell myself lies and stories, I want to be in space, in the distant past, magic, whatever. I don't need to be like, oh, what's a fun story? Bob, my neighbor, has murdered and chopped up my children. Like, ooh, isn't that fun fiction? No, God, no. I'm gonna go clean the shotgun fiction. That's not fun. Like I'm not gonna sleep tonight because that might actually happen.
Rob Zombie movies at all. Like House of a Thousand Corpses, none of that shit.
I haven't seen that one. Like, I mean, I dig the horror genre in general, right? But like, yeah, the ones where it's like, home invasions, less fun. The Purge was far enough out there that, like I kind of dug the first Purge. I've been meaning to see the other ones, but I think they came out right around when the boy was born. So not exactly good family watching at that point, but like, Strangers or I See You, like that one's horrific, and especially because very often they cross into the whole, I have a hard line with no violence against women and children, right? Like if it's too graphic, if it's too, visceral there, I've always had a problem, let alone when I started a family. Like that's just,
clearly one of my just depends on what you
definitely think. Don't watch Last House on the Left.
Right.
Oh yeah, no. Have any of you seen that? It's probably the best horror. Is it horror? I guess it's horror movie I've seen in a while. Where this like an author lives in the woods. She's mute, and there's like a guy who tries to kill her because he wants to.
Good for him. It's nice to have.
So it's A Quiet Place. No, I'm just kidding. It's a different, that one was pretty good, but still I've been telling the wife not to watch it for, since it came out because, again, children, like she has a similar kind of thing. Like she couldn't get through Walking Dead anymore.
A Quiet Place is one of those movies you can watch it the first time and be like, yeah, that was pretty good. But if you watch it again, you're like, wait, no, there's stupid things going on here.
Well, I mean, it's a requisite of the genre. So,
see, horror is
some of them survive
like weird genres because there's so many subgenres, right? Like,
right.
Some people consider like Psycho, Alfred Hitchcock horror, but I call it psychological thriller, right? Like,
but this is where genres get fuzzy and stupid, right? What's the difference between a psychological thriller and a horror? Because Psycho, in my opinion, is definitely like. I know it's a sliding scale, right? They're probably on the same, plane, but they're not necessarily next to each other. But what's the difference between Psycho and Saw? Like
Psycho and Saw are much closer to each other than Psycho and Saw 2 are.
Okay, sure, but so that's where they become.
So I think the big difference is in like Psycho, it's the buildup and the suspense that really drives the fear. And Saw, it's much more you see the fear, right?
Okay, so for you, the source of the fear differentiates horror from suspense or
Correct.
from a psychological.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, it's the difference between existential atmospheric versus jump scares, right?
Right.
Sure.
So,
And yeah,
like,
and I
definitely films are much more horror to me than like Psycho.
But even that, like the first Halloween, for example, you could make the argument that the buildup of him stalking is lends to the atmosphere because because that kind of a movie, it's like the jump scares are kind of like these little payoffs to what is already an element of dread, as opposed to what people would label as cheap jump scares in more recent things.
Right. And you also have like, this kind of bleeds into like monster movies of, is it better to see the monster or have the monster?
Probably not. I think Alien did it right of like, you can hear some of the bad shit that's happening and you see tiny little bits of it, but then the rest of it's filled in with your imagination.
Right. Well, and Alien's a good example of like cross genre, right? Because it's definitely horror-ish, but it's also sci-fi.
But sci-fi's a setting.
So,
sci-fi is also a genre.
It's a
genre snob.
But it's important because genres are stupid and messy and imprecise.
Right. So the genre of the story that you're getting is kind of like, what kind of arc do I want to go on? But you can put that in any setting. You can have medieval fantasy horror. You can have super sci-fi horror. Those are settings.
All right, director, I want to see you write Alien in Lord of the Rings.
Yeah,
probably
you just changed the alien into an orc.
No, yeah.
Go to like, some of the Warhammer stuff. It's probably already done.
Or Witcher, right? Isn't that the entire point of Witcher? Like, the difference is Witcher is, because there's a hero involved, right? So just take Geralt out of Witcher and then write Witcher.
All of those side quests that you didn't do and see what happens.
Yeah. That little girl who turned into a monster? Yeah, nobody's coming to save you. Nobody's gonna fix that for you. So, yeah. So I mean that's kind of the thing. So like I was just looking up just to see, because one of the things I was thinking to peg on that might differentiate horror from from psychological, for example, is that some of the genres and the like will differentiate themselves based off of the nature of the threat, right? So like you could say psychological horror might be a
more
dude
mundane
who's stalking you or whatever, right? But horror might be like some kind of supernatural thing or something along those lines. But that's not it. That the definition apparently is just speculative fiction, which is intended to frighten, scare, or disgust. And it's like, well, lots of shit does that. That's where it becomes like the Venn diagram overlaps to the point of being next to useless.
Yeah,
it becomes completely subjective. And that's kind of my argument, right? Like, so what spawned this off, like we know probably, but if anybody's tuning in for the first time, like Andreas and I have been going back and forth for a month or two on Control, because to me, Control is a horror game. He thinks it's more psychological, right? That's pretty much the distinction. Aliens are invading from another dimension. It's understood they're interdimensional creatures. We've had contact with them, whatever. They are taking over people and mind controlling them. And then those people are trying to kill you. They also do get, changed. It's not necessarily on the level of like Last of Us, right? With the clickers and whatever else. But they do get changed through this power, right? So a lot of these things, it's an alien influence. They're coming in from another dimension, mind controlled. There are floating bodies everywhere. Like all of your coworkers are literally flying or floating around you chanting. That shit's horror to me, But then,
but just when I think horror game, like I think Amnesia: Dark Descent, for example, like I don't feel like Control is made to scare me or scare the player in any way, and like when I think horror, it's made to scare you.
Okay, and I guess it depends, because where our argument was is why do my floating coworkers not scare you? Because that would scare the fuck out of me. But so tell me more about Amnesia Descent so I can compared.
I haven't actually I have never played it much because it scares me too much. I can't play horror games. That's also why I don't think Control's a horror game.
So no Outlast. Did you do? I mean, Doom is it a horror game because you're the killer, or?
I mean, it doesn't scare me. What's it called?
A horror setting, not a horror game.
Yeah. Fear, is that what it's called? The one that it's kind of a shooting game, but it's definitely that scared the shit out of me.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I love that game.
I couldn't finish it. I was like, oh
yeah. I played all three of them, and it's one of those that it's like by the time you get to the third, it's almost like sufficiently different. But even though like there is supernatural stuff happening in Fear because it's all people, that's why I'm saying like, what's the difference? Like, is Fear horror or is it psychological? Because certainly there are supernatural things happening, but they're people, and people just did bad shit to each other, right?
Well, I mean, in gaming terms, it would be survival horror, right?
Maybe
not survival, right?
It's not really
there's
survival.
Not really a survival element in Fear. Amnesia is a survival horror, right? You have to survive.
Well, because I'm thinking Silent Hill 2, that's probably the pinnacle of survival horror in my opinion. And that game does a really good job of both showing you disgusting things, but also building atmosphere.
Right. See, and then getting into the subgenres and things like that. I mean, one of the earliest defining things for survival horror from when I was a kid anyway, maybe it doesn't hold up anymore, but it was lack of resources, right? Like that was the difference between Doom and other survival horror games. Is like in Doom, pretty much you just keep shooting, and if you run out, you get the chainsaw. You just don't ever stop ripping and tearing. But like survival horror games, it's like if you shoot this guy in the head 5 times instead of the requisite 3, you're going to run out of bullets for the other one. Like a more recent example, even though it's still a little old, would be the Dead Space games. Are much more survival horror. Because like that one, I remember running out of resources while I'm trying to learn the game, and I'm like, this is not fun. It actually took me 2 or 3 times to get into it. Now it's like one of my favorite series. Was just like, God, this sucks.
It's just hard for me to kind of describe. I feel like if it's a horror game, it's made to scare, and especially in games, not so much movies. Movies, I don't get drawn in the same way. But like games and books, I think also I'm more immersed, and they for example, with Fear, scares the shit out of me. And then it's that's kind of where horror territory is for me. And that's why I was like, for Control, I didn't even consider it that it could be horror. Not that you're not necessarily right or not, but it's just it never crossed my mind because I was never scared. I was interested in the story, what's going on here, what's the why are these almost Lovecraftian influences? I kind of felt that's why I also recommended it to you.
So Lovecraft's not horror now? Is that what
it probably is. I have not read
horror.
Lovecraft.
Yeah, but if you're not afraid of Lovecraft, you don't understand it enough, and that might be a mercy, but still, I mean, seriously.
But you're not I was not scared when reading At the Mountains of Madness. It was horrifying, but I wasn't feeling fear. It was just this almost like a sense of awe.
Sure. Yeah.
So it can be it have the horror elements without making you afraid.
Well, I'm not very good with, in general, horror books. They don't scare me. Movies, visual is what does it for me.
This is the opposite with me. Books, games scare me. Movies don't.
I have a problem with books because because of the way that the stream of consciousness works, right? It's really hard to build up suspense with words on a page for me. And I see the shit coming, as opposed to sometimes in movies you get the jump scare, right? You think it's going to be one thing and they flip it on you, or, in games, again, you can have some of that immediacy. I like to live in the horror genre and post-apocalyptic and things like that because, this is going to be weird maybe, but it's a kind of training for me, right? So when shit is scary, I like to live there so that it doesn't have that control over me as much as anything, so that if shit does happen, I'm not sitting there frozen, and freaking out or whatever. But like books, like even since I was a kid, I was just like, okay, it's words on a page. I'm not afraid. Now, I did get, for lack of a better word, nightmares from it. And I think that was just like, it's so over the top, crazy, existential that it was like, I started ruminating on it and just like, it gestated for a while and things like that. And some new ideas fermented, but it wasn't like I'm sitting there reading the page and like, oh no, he's got a cleaver run, or anything like that. There's no suspense, like you definitely get creeped out and whatever. But yeah, I didn't ever like reading horror books because to me, that's like going to the zoo, like, ooh, scary tiger, it's behind a 4-inch pane of glass, like, yes, if I was in there, that shit would be scary, but I guess I'm not as immersed, as some of the other media. So,
well, there's a little bit of a disconnect. I mean, like there have been things I've read on like a Reddit post, and what's the no sleep one, or when people do the Ask Reddits and they're like, what's the creepiest thing you've ever come across, and you've already like conditioned yourself to think like, all right, this might be a misunderstanding, but this is real life. So now is the unsettling element, especially. But if I have like a physical book in my hand, it doesn't.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad you brought that up actually, because I love saving those Ask Reddit threads till like 10 p.m. at night, because that's where like
that's when they always seem to pop up, even though they've been up for hours. It's like, I noticed this now.
There was one in the last week that I actually caught during the daylight, and I'm like, hoo, I'm gonna read that one later. And then there was like one story out of it that was like unique enough that it was like, okay, that shit is gonna keep me up tonight. And it was funny because the wife came to bed and she's like, what are you still doing up? And I'm like, I sent her a link to the story, and she's like, what's wrong with you? Why did you do that? And yeah, but that's I don't know, like, that's where I get my rocks off. There's the only thing that comes to mind to say, right? Like it's the same thing with what was the Paranormal Activity, of all the stupid shit, right? Like the first and second one, the first and second one especially, those movies kept me up at night, and a big part of it is because you don't see the monster, and so now everything in your house, everything that your subconscious keys into is now in that thing and you're immersed with it. But yeah, like I love those Ask Reddit threads, but it's not quite the same thing, because those are meant to be, real people having real experiences and stuff. I don't know. It doesn't hit me the same as like Stephen King, like, right. Lost Boys or It or The Stand.
Well, that's why a lot of the found footage stuff works, like why Blair Witch was such a big thing, because it was, it's meant to. If
that movie scared the ever-loving shit out of me. That's a movie that actually like, really scared me.
It's meant to evoke the same thing. It's like, this is supposedly like Paranormal Activity. This is real life.
I was 14 or whatever.
What happened?
Me. Jesus Christ.
Yeah. And I mean, maybe in that one, it also depends on like the difference I would take to it, right? Like if I'm watching it and be like, okay, if this is me, I don't have options, right? Like Paranormal Activity, the assumption is it is it's a demon, right? That basically there's a demon stalking your house. It's doing creepy shit. It's one of those where like, especially the first one, you're like watching for when the picture frame tilts 45 degrees. And you're like, oh God, that's so scary. Or you hear the footsteps, right? For me, honestly, that stuff was good, but it was the end that really seals it, right? Like the screaming and all that, when everything just comes off the hook, right? But like Blair Witch and stuff like that, I'm like, why are you guys in the woods without a firearm? Like that's why Blair Witch doesn't do anything for me, because it's like, there are some where it's like, okay, it may still be supernatural. She may be a witch. She may have cast protection from mundane missiles today or whatever, right? But I'm going to die with a gun in my hand for that one, right? Like with Paranormal Activity, that guy's going to eat your face if he decided to eat your face, right? And it was a slow build, but like, yeah, Blair Witch is like, yep, there's creepy people fucking around in the woods. That one just... So I guess some of the genres don't do it for me, like Wicker Man is another one where it's like, yep, you're dumb and you should have left the town. And I'm talking like 80s or whatever, with
I saw the Nick Cage one. Like I did not want to see it, and my girlfriend at the time did. I was just like, I hate you for making me watch this.
The only thing I know about that movie is the bees and the him running in a bear costume and punching that woman in the face.
I need to see it for the memes at some point, but as a result, that puts it pretty far down on my list. So.
Well, every Nick Cage movie, with the exception of like 6, are memes.
It's true. I actually kind of almost liked a Nicolas Cage movie that came out in the last 5 or 10 years.
Was it the Kung Fu one?
No, it was Next, I think was the name of it. The one where you can see like 6 seconds in the future.
It's actually a good movie.
That was a while ago.
That was one of the last before he just said yes to everything, I think, or he got lucky with the yes to everything.
Well,
it was
he has to because he has no money. He owes a lot of money.
Yeah, Next was 14 years ago.
Oh, Jesus. Yeah. I don't think I saw it when it came out. It was just, I don't know, maybe because like my family had it on and I saw the end, right? And I'm like, holy shit, this is actually like a good concept. They handled his powers very well. Right. So I'm going to have to go watch this, even though it's a Nicolas Cage movie. And then I watched it, and the first 80% is a Nicolas Cage movie. And that's when I kind of realized like Nicolas Cage doesn't actually know how to act. In every movie that he's in, he's Nicolas Cage. He just may be the magician Nicolas Cage, or he may be the psychic Nicolas Cage, or he may be the con man Nicolas Cage,
or the car robber Nicolas Cage.
Yeah, right. And it's funny, we all know the movies that we're talking about. So,
or clearly Harry Dresden Nicolas Cage.
Yeah, he said sorcerer, wizard, whatever. Yep.
Right. Yeah, and it's funny too because I rewatched that one.
Like Gone in 60 Seconds is like one of my all-time favorite like guilty pleasure movies. I fucking I can quote that movie almost verbatim, and I know it's terrible, but I fucking love it.
It's not that bad. It's a solid B, I guess. Like it's not like an actual terrible movie.
But see that's a combination of 2 genres: Nick Cage movie and Jerry Bruckheimer.
I was gonna say Nick Cage is clearly his own genre.
And so is Jerry Bruckheimer. It's his own genre too.
Yeah.
I think there was one other genre thing, I think you and me, Justin, where I was trying to explain it to you and just like you weren't having it a while ago. If you remember that, when I was trying to explain to you that the Dresden Files are considered low fantasy. Okay. I remember you were not having it.
So that was a definition problem between low and high fantasy, right? Because I had my wires crossed from a partially D&D understanding of low and high magic is not necessarily the same as low and high fantasy.
Yeah.
And so
right, but I think a lot of people have wires crossed on that, or at least I'm very confused because I've seen a definition of like, I don't know how many people hold this as true, but like if it is on a different planet, then it is high fantasy regardless of the fantastical elements of it. So
if it's a new world, if it's not on planet Earth,
but even if it's just realm, it's medieval fantasy. Europe and they have no magic other than one tiny little thing or something, or the fact that it's on another planet, that's considered high fantasy. And by some people, and no, it's fucking not.
It is.
Yeah. No. Well, I mean, because it
is.
To introduce something else that we've talked about on the show briefly, at least, and brings in more genre stuff, right? And this could go back to genres are messy and stupid and poorly defined. It like low and high fantasy is kind of it's the fantasy equivalent of hard and soft science fiction, right? Yeah. So maybe that could be adopted. Like if you're more inclined to that verbiage.
I would actually say hard and soft science fiction is more high and low magic versus not high and low fantasy.
Yeah, they're pretty similar. Like they're kind of on a scale.
I guess you could say it that way, but like hard sci-fi is also almost usually entirely based in our current solar system, or at least a linear progression from our current technology, right? So that would still be a low fantasy, even if it's also low magic, right? But that's kind of like those two do overlap quite a bit. They almost have to, right? You can't have a low fantasy. Well, yeah, I guess
you can have low fantasy high magic, because I think Dresden's a good example.
I was going to say, yeah, Dresden probably fits that fairly well, but it kind of depends, right? Because in a sense, no, because there are maybe thousands of wizards, and then of course you've got all the monsters and whatever. So I guess to get another point of reference and try and triangulate this, how would you classify The Witcher as far as like low high magic, I guess?
For him, fairly high.
For him,
but also with
magic,
all the creatures and the other supernaturals, and he's not the only one who does it because all of the sorceresses and the other sorcerers. Okay. Like that's fairly high fantasy, I would say.
It is high. Yeah. Well, it's high fantasy, but it's also high magic.
Yes, all of it.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So, yeah, because with Dresden though, like, while the monsters are running around and things like that, it's not necessarily in the open. Whereas, like in The Witcher, people hire the Witcher, right? Like common people don't necessarily have access to magic.
Masquerade trope can still be there in a high fantasy setting. Like I would say Dresden or like the World of Darkness, they're still pretty high magic, even like high fantasy, just urban fantasy setting.
No, that's not how high fantasy, low fantasy works.
There's a lot of fantastical shit. It just because it's behind a masquerade doesn't mean it's not a part of that spectrum.
Yes, okay, but yes.
An unrelated note, I really fucking hate the way urban fantasy therefore means it's the there's a good genre of like say the Mercy Thompson or Dresden or the Caliandro series or other things of like they're in a city, they're in real world, they've got like the masquerade almost always. Mm-hmm. And therefore that has become the urban fantasy name, but that doesn't have to be, because if you try to tell me that Perdido Street Station was not urban fantasy, even though it's on a different world with a way crazier other shit, it is still an urban setting, and it is urban fantasy.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I don't follow all of your references, so to spit one that you're not going to understand, like it's the same thing with like Greyhawk, for example, right? Like Greyhawk is like a monolithic city in one of the D&D settings. And so even though there's an entire world and there's countries and whatever, it's defined by the city, or maybe if you're familiar with like Waterdeep from Forgotten Realms instead, just because it's more common. Okay, so you're not the target audience for this, but those take place in an urban setting, but they're not urban fantasy per se, you know. That's
but
an interesting hair splitting.
There's no way for me to say that Perdido Street Station isn't an urban fantasy because the city was so important to the story. Right. They were tracking down something and it was very horrifying. But like they had like, where is it in the city? Why is it choosing these places? How do we get around? Oh, we're on the run from authorities. Where do we hide? And the personality of the city was super important.
I don't think urban fantasy has to be contemporary. That's why there's also, I think that the high-low fantasy distinction is important. I think high fantasy, a new world can have urban fantasy. I think the first Mistborn book is an urban fantasy book. Sure. So I don't think that's locked down to contemporary modern cities.
Right. The way that it gets put on the bookshelf by the publishers would not put Perdido Street Station as urban fantasy, but it should totally count by logical definitions. Well, because there's this other thing that they're trying to describe with Mercy Thompson and Dresden.
Going on the shelf, it's really going to be the lowest common denominator, right? This is going to be the most recognizable trait.
Exactly. They're doing it out of marketing, which is again why it's garbage to try and use it, right? Because the academic, even like let's say let's split hairs, because this is what's always bugged me, right? So you've got your literary academics, because they don't actually give a shit about following any kind of scientific process. They do it by feel, which is why I hate genres, right? Because this one, well, you could argue psychological versus horror, but I wasn't really scared by it, so it's not really a horror one, Andreas, versus like an actual rigorous, you know, metrics-based thing, versus I'm not going to put it in urban fantasy because that's going to put it on the shelf next to 5 other books nobody's ever heard of and the Dresden Files, and we're never going to sell a book, you know. So
excuse me, did you just say nobody ever heard of? I'll have you know, Mercy Thompson's a very good book series. It is really good. The world is stellar. The characters.
I've never read it, therefore it can't be good.
Right. So 60% of a nerd-based podcast that prides themselves in pop culture references and reading some of the shit's never heard of it. What do you think?
It's my number one recommendation.
Looks like.
Like
Dresden. I mean,
I'm not trying to insult the person. I'm just saying I've never heard of it. So.
But how many other things do you read that is similar to Dresden Files? Because a lot of the things that get put into this section of urban fantasy, a lot of times it's that paranormal romance, paranormal thriller, and a paranormal thing is what is trying, like it might be trying to use that definition instead. And that's where Mercy Thompson might fall into it a little bit more, because there's more of a romance element. It is not as disastrous as Dresden.
Mhm.
Dresden is kind of like an outlier in that genre.
Doesn't Anita Blake often get thrown in there?
Yes.
Please don't bring up Anita Blake. I fucking hate.
But it
just
fits
did,
in how they have categorized it.
I was going to say
Anita Blake is fucking porn. Okay.
I was going to say
But not torture porn.
Anita Blake, doesn't it shift over time? So that would be
Yeah,
another
it's
interesting one.
It's pretty heavy on the romance. I was like, okay, the world's actually interesting, and I like the main character, and then slowly it just becomes porn, and I was like, I read 10 books here, and I'm just like, I don't want to continue anymore. I wasted 10 books.
People always say that. I've never actually read them, so I don't have the frame of reference. But there is actual like plot based where it's based like Kushiel's Dart is fucking
Kushiel's Dart was awesome,
but it's supposed to be very good, and
it was very good.
Or is that fantasy?
It's fantasy. It's historical. It's an alternate historical real world, but a couple things tweaked.
So why is it alternate history and not high fantasy?
It has a low kind of fantastical element. There's like something kind of very nebulous, and maybe like a demigod is involved, but very small amount in that book. Otherwise,
she's cursed, right? That's the whole point.
Well, she kind of is. Yes, she has that she has the dart that marks her as being a little bit weird, but mostly that she really enjoys BDSM. That's the way that it expresses itself. And she's in France. They go to England. They go to Ireland. They have slightly different names, but it's real world map.
Right.
They have
low
Christians. They have Jews. They have they're just slightly different names.
Oh, then it's definitely fantasy.
Well, yeah. I looking it up to be precise in the definitions again, because that's where my brain triggers in, if nothing else. So like low fantasy is Earth or near Earth. Right. If it's recognizable as Earth, it's low fantasy.
There's
if it's
not
a different
magic
world,
thrown around. There is no fireballs. There are no sorcerers. There's just like kind of
high
a prophecy
magic,
a couple
low
times.
magic.
Yeah, but
not high fantasy, low fantasy.
So
and
no magic. But that's why there's this whole alternative history fiction genre.
And then there's fucking steampunks. What the hell's that?
Well, I
think alternative
steampunk can be its setting. Yeah, steampunk can be its own thing, but how about the guy who rewrote like World War I and World War II with magic, right? Like, so that's low fantasy, high magic, right?
And then there's the Temeraire series, which is the Napoleonic Wars with dragons. The only difference in that world is that they have dragons. That's it.
Probably low magic then.
Because there's no magic. There's no sorcerers.
Well, but dragons are magic, so
they act just like animals. They are biological animals.
What was that Christian Bale movie, Reign of Fire? Where
that was fun.
It's just dragons. I mean, there's no magic there. They're just creatures. It was Christian Bale and Matthew McConaughey.
Yep. Wow. Way back when. It was great.
It was Matthew McConaughey. He went bald and had like what you have and was a ridiculous dragon slayer from the U.S. Army.
Right. No, I mean, it was great because they also get into the whole like dragons make napalm in their mouth, So it would be hard sci-fi then, because the hard sci-fi, at least to keep from the fisticuffs between fans, is usually allowed at least one MacGuffin, right? They get their one piece of technology that is a little incredible. So.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on the thing, though. Like, the reason we classify it that way is because we know, quote unquote, dragons aren't real. If we found out tomorrow that Reign of Fire was about to happen, we dug a hole too deep and dragons actually came out, we wouldn't be like, well, this is now a sci-fi fantasy world. We'd be like, oh, okay, dragons are real.
It's historical fiction then.
If there are dragons. It's
an alternate timeline, but, real world. Yeah.
If there are dragons, it's fantasy. I'm gonna die on that.
When you wake up tomorrow and there's a dragon outside your house, you can tell yourself that as it burns you.
I live in a fantasy world. Woohoo!
You do live in a fantasy world, but for different reasons.
Yeah. St. Peter killed the dragon, right? He's the dragon slayer, so I'm just saying it could be alternate history. George? Okay.
At least as genres go, hard and soft sci-fi are much easier to define than most other genres, I think.
Yeah, once you get it down to like how far can you slide it, and that was one that I quibbled with early on too. I was like, no, that doesn't make sense that you're only allowed one thing, right? Like if you have FTL and the associated technologies, like is almost necessary, but then it's like, okay, compare like Star Trek versus like Ringworld, like Larry Niven's Ringworld, and it's like, yeah, okay, and some of what Arthur C. Clarke did, right? Because his stuff is almost more philosophical, even though it is set in a science fiction world,
Mm-hmm.
So
The Martian it is hard sci-fi, like really scientific. That's a really big thing of the story. There's nothing technically fantastical in it at all. The only thing is like, well, they did this thing that it could be possible, right?
Right.
Well, it's more about explaining the technology in what we think is possible at this current time, or how, people expect things to work in the future.
And with all of the current information and whatnot but it's not The Expanse. It is not Honor Harrington. It is not Mass Effect.
Right. It's definitely a hard sci-fi if that's what you're going for. Yeah.
And what is another example of hard sci-fi? What is a really good one?
Well,
same author as The Martian, but Artemis is a really good example of hard sci-fi.
I haven't consumed that one. I can't.
So I mean, Expanse is one that you've seen there. You could argue potentially Firefly, though I would understand the quibble. But the classic ones, like if you want to go back too far and not enjoy watching the movie, in my opinion, 2001: A Space Odyssey, and what was the sequel or whatever, like those are hard sci-fi with, aliens are weird and unknowable, and then you go into a wormhole. You could say what was the not Inception, but the same director, right? Interstellar. Yeah, Interstellar is hard sci-fi because technically everything that happens there is understood except for maybe the aliens, like when he goes into the singularity.
Hard sci-fi gets like one MacGuffin, right? Usually.
Yeah.
It's Expanse kind of especially as it goes on.
At least the start of The Expanse is much more hard sci-fi.
Yes. Right. As it goes on, it has at least two things, like because the juice and then the thing I'm not going to say because it's going to spoil Jacob.
I mean, already the Epstein drive and the juice is two MacGuffins.
Well, I mean, you could argue the Epstein drive. I don't know the specifics, but like a lot of what they talk about is still fusion-based drive. It's just not something we have today. So it's not like not a warp core where we take antimatter and run it through a dilithium crystal and then pure energy comes out, right? Like it's an Epstein drive, but it's fusion based. Like it's sure, I can't pull up the schematics, but
the hard sci-fi is like there's actually like explanation of why things work in today's physics, essentially.
Right.
And that's where, to me, the juice is the MacGuffin, even though you could probably still argue, that, but I can't think of any instance where injecting your body with any kind of viscous liquid is going to help you withstand gravitational forces. So that's where it becomes a MacGuffin, like that's one of those, like, we're not going to do inertial dampeners. We're going to do the juice. That's his hand weight for being able to pull hygiene maneuvers. And even still, there are consequences, right?
Yeah. Right. They still have nosebleeds. They still pass out. They still die.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas you're right. Technically, I guess it starts to bleed off, and that's why I hate the one is hard sci-fi, because the other part of driving the story that is the extrasolar influence. So probably said too much already, but
so the other thing that like really comes into hard sci-fi, oddly enough, is just like people actually taking gravity into account. Like, in The Expanse, you already see like, oh, he's, low gravity planet, where like Star Trek, everyone's got normal gravity.
Yeah,
everyone
gravity,
has atmosphere.
Gravity and inertia, some of those fundamental forces, like, you can also get into it, like, obviously Aliens has its other problems, right? But the reason why I'm bringing it up is because my AP physics teacher brought up the dropship sequence from Aliens in the physics class. And he's like, tell me all like 31 problems that are wrong with this scene. And it's like, Jesus, 31. Like, I'm a physics nerd, but I'm not sure I'm pulling a number out of my hat. But basically it's like they get in a drop ship, and the ship points down towards the planet and free falls, even though they're in orbit, and then as they're free falling, you can hear immediately the atmosphere and all of this stuff. And it's like, due to the size of the ship and the nature of everything and what's going on, like, that, and all of the people, even though the ship is pointed towards, perpendicular towards the planet, they're all standing having a discussion. Like if I remember right, that's when you get the whole like smart missiles, lasers, sharp sticks, that sequence is all happening. Yeah, right. And so like that's that scene, that one scene by itself, ignores like three fundamental forces in our universe. So and then you get Marvel, right? We've had the discussion with Iron Man, and like he's got to have some, like, even the Enterprise wants those inertial dampeners, because as soon as he lifts off, he should have turned into a pancake in his shoes, let alone when he lands. Like, there's no way. Or he fucking comes through a space portal after being nuked and gets caught by an impossibly massive creature and then slammed into the ground,
and then wants food.
Yeah, right. Nobody tried to kiss me, right? So, yeah.
That's another like, for example, the whole Marvel MCU, like, there's like, because the different movies are sort of different genre movies, but they're all superhero movies. So I guess superhero, that's the setting,
right?
And
even like Captain America is a good example, right? Because like the first one is historical piece superhero movie. Second one is very much a spy thriller,
right?
Yeah.
So it's funny too, because so like that's why the MCU
third one sucked, man.
You're fired. Get out of here.
Get out of here.
But
I'm OG. You can't fire me, motherfucker.
We're gonna make our own network with Black.
I need to make an amendment to the founding roster. We can do that. Like we have 3 votes here. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, no, that's a big part of why the MCU worked, I think, right? Is that each of the movies were obviously their hero and the superhero genre, but they had a very noticeable, subgenre. Right. They were a war movie or a spy movie or
a heist movie and Ant-Man and
right. It's funny too, because we were talking, especially around phase 1 when they started, when we got like Thor and Thor 2, but specifically also Guardians of the Galaxy, like, Captain America kind of helped set the timeline in a lot of ways. And like Iron Man was kind of almost a microcosm if you compared like all the hero movies, they, obviously are more or less insulated, especially in phase 1. But as much crap as Thor gets, it kind of helped prep you for some of the crazier shit. And then you get to Guardians of the Galaxy, and then that really is like, well, if you guys ate up Guardians of the Galaxy, we are going to make Thor Ragnarok, because tell me that was going to happen. Like if that had been Thor 2, like if the MCU had survived doing something that zany and over the top, so early, like you had to build on it.
This is off subject a bit, but like everyone hates on Thor 2, and I always thought it was a good movie.
No, you're wrong.
But okay, so you say Civil War's bad, and
I haven't seen that one.
Good.
It sucked. I enjoyed Guardians of the Galaxy. I enjoyed Thor Ragnarok.
No,
but Thor 2
because you're
sucked.
watching it wrong. So we just rewatched it, and it's funny you say that, because the wife was like, "Oh, we should watch Thor. No, we should watch Thor 2 because it's the better one." I'm like, "No, nobody thinks that." Like, okay, like don't get me wrong, I liked Thor 2.
I'm not saying it's a great movie, but I enjoyed it.
Thor 2 isn't. It's not a Thor movie. It's not like fantasy, whatever. It's science fiction. And if you watch it as Star Wars or Star Trek, if you stop watching it as Guardians,
was not the problem in Thor 2. It was the storyline and how they treated their characters, and just like it was like the characters could not keep it cohesive enough.
Everybody gets their moment.
But their moment sucked.
Gets tackled by 50 dudes, and he's having a great time until they kick his ass. Like what?
Their moments sucked. Like Loki being distraught, I did enjoy that part, but Natalie Portman's character was fucking useless. Even though I have the special physics knowledge and like I can do these things because I have an iPad. It sucked.
Okay, that's it.
I've been doing a lot of rewatching of the MCU lately, but I haven't done Thor 2 yet. I've been doing like around the Avengers movies and Civil War because that's the best part. But I mean, I'm gonna have to rewatch it, I guess, and probably agree with Alex.
recast the battle on Asgard as fucking like Romulans invading Earth, and it becomes a completely different movie. Like as soon as they crashed in and the Dark Elves start pouring out in the throne room, and I'm like, holy shit, they're Romulans! Like that's what's going on here. Like, and the fact that Frigga even mentions the fact that like on your planet it's called magic, but here it's called technology. Clark's third law, like and the inverse of
that was not the problem.
Yeah, whatever. So Natalie Portman's character is just there to be hot anyway. So like,
I wonder if she's actually coming back now, right?
If that's the point, then just bring back Kat Dennings and her giant boobs. I mean, I like Natalie Portman too, whatever. But it's just like, if her point is just to be hot, then just let her be hot. Don't try to dress it up of like, I have an iPad and I have a PhD and blah 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 blah.
Yeah, no, she's out of her depth, right? Like I think that's part of.
But they didn't let her be out of her depth. If she was supposed to be out of her depth, she wasn't, because she, at the end of it, she had her weird portal thing, whatever the fuck she was doing in the courtyard.
Yeah, but that was Selvig's thing. Like she was pushing the buttons, but Selvig built the things.
Oh, that reminds me, having just watched Ultron, did you guys notice how the new Avengers facility is setting up with like Selvig's there, and the doctors who can heal them is there, and it's like it's all getting gathered here at the Avengers facility, and then it's never really brought up again ever that they're all together here. Or
the fact that you basically get the B team from Avengers, and it almost sets up Civil War, but not quite, right? Because all the Avengers go their different ways, and then at the end, Captain America is there with Falcon and.
It's kind of says like, okay, a new Avengers team too, but then just Civil War happens and the whole thing kind of fizzles out.
Well, I mean, they kind of bring them in for Civil War. Yes, I would have enjoyed more storytelling there, but
I feel like they had a plan with that whole thing, and then they kind of changed their minds. Maybe because Ultron was just reading, he had a plan, and then he didn't want to do it anymore, and the other guys took over.
Maybe
most of like the direction, and Feige too, I guess. I don't know how much was
since the beginning. So
yeah, but I think it took more. I think Josh was like really putting a lot of like the direction, and then he quit, and then they changed direction. If I were to guess, because it feels like they changed direction.
Yeah, I mean, he had a lot to do with Avengers and Age of Ultron, right? But I don't think he had a lot to do with the overall vision and like the individual hero movies, right? So, but yeah, right. It would be a pun, but it wasn't intentional. So,
what's WandaVision? What genre is that?
It's just, all of them.
Yes.
Hero.
Which episode?
I'm behind, so please don't.
The real world part of WandaVision.
Like I'm through episode 3 or 4.
And it's a superhero movie. Yeah. Like we don't have enough.
But isn't that only a setting?
Nah. It's more like a theme.
Yeah,
it's a character archetype.
So it's low fantasy because it's on Earth. It's a low fantasy superhero.
I'm gonna throw something at you.
Look, she's a witch. It matters how high or low magic and low.
She's a witch in comic books. I don't think she's a witch in the MCU. Not established anyway in the MCU.
Did they ever explain why people have powers?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mostly.
Okay. Because
you didn't watch Age of Ultron, but that's the beginning part of Age of Ultron.
I know she was introduced in Age of Ultron because I did watch half of it, and then I got bored and I turned it off.
But they also tell you why. They were
experimented on
with the Mind Stone, which they didn't realize was the Mind Stone at that point.
It was also MCU trying to bring them in and them not being mutants. Because they
had to come up with a different way, right?
Otherwise, it would have just been they're mutants.
Because Fox owned the rights for mutants. So that's why they started calling them enhanced, which they also introduced mostly. Like they did a little bit in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., but definitely Age of Ultron, I think, was the first movie reference to that. They experimented on him with the Mind Stone, which is also where Vision gets his powers-ish. He's also a vibranium robot. That's not really a bad place to start. But his whole like laser beam and flight and all of that stuff is because he's got the Mind Stone in his mind. But like a lot of the big tier superheroes, like they did a little bit where like there's quite a bit riffed off of Captain America. Like they even incorporated Hulk's origin story into trying to recreate the super soldier serum, and several other heroes and villains come off of that. Carol Danvers is from she's from space, right? The Space Stone. And then
she's the one that can, like, the blue one.
Which one is she? What? Who?
Captain Marvel. So yeah, the one
she's from the Tesseract.
Yeah. So right, and but that's also important because the Tesseract is the space stone powered a lot of other technologies and things like that. Thor and the Asgardians are their own thing. So you get a different
alien physiology, I guess.
Yeah.
And kind of magic, but even though it's supposed to be technology, but it's kind of magic anyway.
It's it's both, right? Like it's almost. It really is sufficiently advanced magic,
right?
The Loki is like, it's not like he's using gadgets. It's like it's powers that he has.
Right. No. He definitely has magical abilities.
Right. At least as far as the MCU is concerned, they still call him, witches and things like that. So because that comes up in Thor 2. So
right.
Witch. Yeah. So he still learned his powers from Frigga, and she learned her powers from wherever, and Odin presumably still had to go through quite a bit to get his foresight and whatnot. But where their gadgets are concerned, it is still technology. It's just so advanced, like you see, I can't even pronounce the planet, right? But in Infinity War, when they go create their weapons, like it's not any kind of technology that we would understand per se, but it's like that's definitely such a high level splice of technology and fantasy at that point that it's like whatever. It could be nanites, it could be something else.
Magic in the MCU. That's just. There's a lot that isn't technology based.
Because there is also like for Doctor Strange. That's magic.
Yeah, it's magic in Thor's hammer. That's magic, right?
Yeah. If you want to split hairs, he's a warlock, not a sorcerer, potentially. So but
because he doesn't kill.
He might be a wizard in a sense because he still had to study somewhat to get his powers, but the ancient one, right? She's siphoning power off of another dimension, so she's got a patron, which makes her a warlock for the D&D nerds out there.
That's true.
So, you want to talk about genres is confusing.
Or she's a cleric.
Well, it depends on how hair splitting you get with the thing. Because in Skyrim, you can do both, so it doesn't matter. But but for D&D terms, you have to take a feat or have a multi-class dip. So, director, you're still mad about the Thor 2 thing. Do you want to keep going? You want to fight some more?
I haven't watched that movie in a really long time. I just remember it sucked.
I literally watched it
particularly how it handled its characters.
Yeah. See, and
we should totally do a watch party through Disney Plus and watch Thor 2 and talk shit about it.
Let's do it.
Why not, director? It'd be fun.
I don't have Disney Plus. I ain't paying for that shit.
Oh, you can use my
account. Gosh.
But all the good content's on Disney Plus.
Right? Like 80% of your childhood and anything for the last 20 years, So.
I can find that elsewhere.
You didn't hear that here, folks. So
we already discussed that.
Maybe that should be a Patreon tier. Is once a month we do a watch party through Disney Plus, and you can.
That's not a bad idea.
If Her Majesty agrees to it, anyway. So
thank you by calling me my proper title.
All right.
Hey, now
I refuse. I'm against.
Her Majesty. What am I like?
You're OG apparently. And I'm EG apparently, so
I'm firmly against royalty, so I won't be using that title.
You have a king.
And first of all, we have a queen, and I'm against it.
You are the one with royalty.
Yeah, and I don't think we should have it. I think it should be away with it.
Ceremonial in your country, right?
Yeah, it's completely ceremonial.
Doesn't matter. Technically, you are the royal subject of someone.
Yeah, and I think we should get rid of it. That's stupid. I hate it. But the people who argue that it should stay say that's we're getting more out of it than we're paying for it. It's a plus business because of tourism and shit.
Probably. Buckingham Palace doesn't matter.
Why, are you guys selling titles that I wasn't aware of when I was looking for all the places that sold titles?
I don't think we sell titles though.
So how are you I'm not coming to your country to see the Queen,
Yeah, but a lot of Chinese people are
closer. Really? Why? Like, I mean, they go everywhere, so that's not necessarily a given. But since you called it out, like, is there more to that story? Like, why?
I think they just see as there's also an author, H.C. Anderson, wrote The Little Mermaid.
It's Christian
the original
Anderson.
And a lot of other things, and that's very popular in China. So that with like we have a king, we have a queen, and they see Denmark as like a fairy tale land, and then they come here or something like that.
Okay, I guess I could see that. I could think of other places to go, right? Because like, you know, the Grimm fairy
let's go to
tales come
Utah.
from Germany, or well, nothing ever happens in Utah, so no, they're not coming here. But no, we still have Chinese tourists for various reasons.
Excuse
but
me,
certainly not because
are they
we
not
have a
building
queen,
the Nostra? What's it called in Utah right now?
The
what?
The big spaceship in the Expanse.
No, they built that on Tycho Station.
Yeah.
Did you watch the show?
No, you built the
but I was like,
you built the
I thought
ship
they already
in
started
space.
down here. I thought they were already like planning this.
That was some of the first stuff that really hooked me with some of the flavor, though, because I was like, holy crap, the Expanse kind of nails it, and I think in a way that like Mormons wouldn't even be too mad about, you know.
Oh yeah, Mormons would totally do some weird shit like that, and I didn't
not even
recognize
just
the name
Nauvoo,
either.
But like the missionaries inviting you to like open mic night or whatever, and I was like,
yeah,
and then the first couple of times you see them as elder with the name tags, and I'm like, holy shit! Like, as somebody who was raised in Utah, I give you my stamp. But apparently the author like finds it as a curio or something, and kind of is trying to lampoon it. So they brought some of that into the show. But yeah, that was
all
funny.
the people who would do anything like the Nauvoo. That's Mormons. The Mormons would do that, and the Mormons would be excited about that.
Well, Starship Troopers, you know, one of the better parts in that movie too.
Yeah.
So New Zion was overrun despite.
I managed to get my husband watching The Expanse, and that's something that we're doing together. And he explained to me all of the things. Like, even I went to high school with a whole bunch of Mormons, but I didn't realize all of the things that they were doing with it. Like, he explained the name, the Nauvoo, was from one of their cities that they built and everything they still own most of, or like the trumpeter and it's like the things. And then he brought back to Starship Troopers, like, oh, this is really accurate in such a weird way.
Right. Well, what's funny / interesting, funny for lack of a better word, is like Nauvoo was supposed to kind of be their Zion, and then they got chased out of it, right? So like,
so now
that's
they're taking
why
it with them.
It's a hang up for them, because then they found real Zion in Utah. And, you know, then changed a bunch of their tenets because the U.S. government said you can't be a state until, you know, you do these things. Incoming new message from God, you know, polygamy is now illegal because the U.S. said so. I mean, because I changed my mind. Sorry, don't hit me with lightning. So, yeah. But sorry if I offended you, but, you know, if you read it straight history without the fluff, that appears to be what happened. So.
And then they ran down to Mexico if they wanted that.
Well, New Mexico and, you know, the Four Corners area, and that's where you get the fundies, right? So.
Well, I mean, a lot of them, I thought, like Romney's family went down to Mexico because they wanted their polygamy.
Awesome. I probably remember a flavor of that, but I've been more focused on what he's doing now than, you know.
But that's why Romney's dad could never have run for president because he was technically born in Mexico.
There you go. I know quite a bit. Yeah, I know quite a bit of that came up when he ran for president, but you know, that was also so long ago, not necessarily in years, but in history that has happened in
your mental brain space.
Yeah, it's like, yes, now don't get me wrong, that's weird and, you know, non-standard even from Utah terms, but compared to the weird and non-standard we've got currently going on with with what's going on, it just seems, you know, like vanilla almost, you know. You're like, I miss when that was weird in the 90s compared to what's going on now. So
plus now, I mean, if most people be like, got 2 wives, no big deal, it's open marriage.
Yeah.
Right. Well, it's legal unless they flipped again, you know. So Utah legalized polygamy before marijuana, so that's the kind of state that we've got.
They legalized it again?
Yeah, and like unless they've rolled it back, like I know it's been a couple of years and I haven't been too worried about it, but yeah, it was legal at least for a little bit of time, which it always should have been, right? Like, don't get me wrong, like you could say whatever you want about the practice, but if it is a purely religious practice and marriage is a religious contract between people, the First Amendment clearly should have protected this, so it should have always been legal. So,
Right. But like, so if they want to put on paper with like tax benefits or something, that's probably not as allowed.
Well, and that's where, the secularism comes in and people start to hem and haw and whatever. But it's like, okay, fine, we could figure that out on the side, but you can't tell me, God, blah, 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 religion, and then we want people to practice their religions and then not like that. Like there's no provision in the Constitution of what level of religiosity we're gonna be permissive about. This podcast has taken a weird turn, but you're welcome.
Right, so I think I found something that's saying bigamy is still not legal, but no one's stopping you from having multiple relationships.
Well, that too, right? But yeah, like again, it runs afoul of the legalities as much as anything. Like, how does insurance work? How do your beneficiaries work?
Right.
I'm okay with society not being able to understand the secular side of things, but you can't come down and like tell me you are not allowed to marry two people. Your pastor is not allowed to create a union between you and your spouse so that you get to go to the celestial kingdom together, since Mormonism.
Right. I don't know. The whole married tax bracket, I believe, is unconstitutional anyway. So,
I mean, someone has to make the bureaucratic decision, and that person's apparently the government.
Right. Well, yeah. You can also go back to like, I mean, the Romney thing was almost inevitable because, quite a few people still believe that, Mormonism is a cult, and compared to like some actual cults, like you may or may not be able to make that distinction, especially if you compare them next to the fundamentalist side, right? Because that part is almost certainly a cult, and the mainstream stuff is still fairly there. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to offend anybody, but from the outside, it's still fairly there.
All religions are a cult.
People act like this is the weird distinction. JFK had to worry about whether he was Protestant or not. So we've always cared, right? And then what's funny is like they still are like, well, are you Protestant or are you a Catholic? Like, because Protestants don't have multiple genres. See, I worked that back in there, but yeah, it's like, give me a break, guys. Like, if you believe in religion, like as long as he's not sacrificing children or something that's like clearly illegal, like as long as like children are not being abused, which again, fundamentalists, but as long as the children are not being abused, then like we decided when we wrote down freedom of religion, we're gonna look the other way for a lot of that. If your religion is BDSM and whatever else, go nuts. Just you can do that thing. The fact that the government is like, well, yeah, but not like that, and you have to be Catholic, that's what we meant for freedom of religion, or you have to be Protestant, that's what we meant. Like, that's nonsense, so.
Yep.
Sorry, I guess you hit that part of my libertarianism right there. So,
Well, I mean, you went on a rant. It's completely right. It's like, I can't disagree with you.
Yeah, I just live and let live. Like most of the religions have modernized to that level of permissiveness.
Yeah, you do you.
Right.
And I'll do me. But all religions are cult.
From a perspective,
some are more on that spectrum than others. I mean, that's also fair to say. It's just Protestantism doesn't really seem like much.
No, I mean that's the state religion
what
here, but
Protestantism? I mean that's like Justin said, it's like genres within genres within genres.
It's monolithic and atomic. There are no distinctions between Unitarians.
If you were to look at Southern Baptist and Missionary Baptist, nothing in common.
Right. Well, yeah, and it's like that's what's funny too, because like yes, Baptists are Protestant, but then which flavor of Baptist are you? Are you the crazy Baptists, or like? I've had people ask me that, and it's like, okay.
I don't know what that is. Lutheran Protestants. That's like the state religion here.
Lutheran is Protestant, but it's more Anglican Protestant than like it's much closer to Catholicism.
It was the first version. It was the first one to break away.
That's. I mean, that's all. I don't.
But it's still very liturgical. That's the word I'm looking for. Where Baptist and other things aren't. Like Methodists aren't liturgical. I could go on
And
for a while.
for layman's terms, I may be incorrect here, but the word that comes to mind is it has more to do with the rituals at that point, right?
Right.
That's what you mean, liturgical.
The liturgy, yeah.
Yeah.
Where like, so basic, the only difference really, I mean, there's some small differences, but like Catholicism and Anglicanism, Episcopal churches is priests can marry as an Episcopal, but other than that, it's all pretty much the same. They have the same, a lot of the same rituals. I mean, I shouldn't say completely the same, but it's very similar.
Right.
Well, priests can marry here. Like I don't know what the I don't know. I'm not. I mean, I'm not so much against religion
marry, but Anglican priests, Lutheran priests, all those people can marry. But that's a whole dumb. If you want to talk about genres, like how you read the Bible, that's a whole other genre.
Yeah, that's not getting into any wars. I mean, yeah, some of my favorite things. I mean, you're talking about like Protestant versus Catholic, and that affected the presidency and whatever. I mean, literally, wars in Europe have been fought over how you cross yourselves and how many fingers you use to represent the Trinity. Like with maybe a little bit of hyperbole, but not as much as you'd think.
No, not really. No. You understated it. The amount of wars and the amount of disasters that happened because of religion.
Right.
Or at least as part of it.
And to be clear there, like as a religious person, to me, the underlying thing of it all is power. It's always going to go back to power. Like you can see that from some of the earliest popes and some of the popes that did not. I mean, you have warrior popes. How do you reconcile that? Because he's wearing the title. He doesn't care so much about the religion. I think at that point he is a warrior because that's how you make money and get new land and shit.
Well, like the whole sale of indulgences was to fund a building project.
Right. Yeah, so that's the thing. Like anytime people are like, well, capitalism is evil or religion is evil or whatever is evil, just look at power. It's just distill it into where's the gradient of power. There's always the haves and the have-nots. Everything else is cloaks and daggers, right? Like, and that's why going back to a side conversation with Andreas, post-scarcity is the economic model for me, because then there is no have-nots and there is nobody with, theoretically, obviously somebody's making the machines and somebody's whatever, but once you've got a replicator in every house, and in Star Trek, they couldn't tell stories anymore, so they still brought in dilithium and latinum as those immutable things that had to fund the economy, basically, because as Americans we don't know how to grok that kind of economy. But that's where you go for it. Like a pure libertarianism or really even anarchy would be great, but that's not how people work. Like if you get 5 people together, someone in the organization, somebody in that small group is going to try and get power over somebody else almost always, and then
if they're not doing it through tangible means, they'll do it through intangible and personality and things. That's always going to happen.
Yeah, and they'll find some way to validate their power. Oh no, I'm divinely inspired by God to rule you, monarchies / religion,
Right.
So.
Well, I mean, and especially religion, because it ties into a more emotional side, is a great way to like exude power. Like, yes, I am the king and I have all this authority, but I'm also inspired by God, and so that creates that emotional tie.
Right. Well, and also intangible. I'm like, who's going to argue with that? I mean, he says God sent him. Who's going to argue with God? I'm taller, so I'm naturally predisposed to leadership, so that's why. Or directors.
Reminds me of Vader Zone.
Well, yes
their
and
entire
no,
society is based on who's the tallest.
Yeah. No, but literally, I mean, there were early societies where that was the case. I mean, study early art history. Hierarchical scale is important. Whether those people were literally actually taller is hard to distinguish, but they certainly were presented bigger in art. You always had your leaders were the biggest people on the reliefs and whatnot. So yeah, I always love that section in history, as you can tell. So, because being nearly a foot taller than most people, be like, you hear that, Slimes? I'm in charge. So,
What?
I know, right? Now we got to go another 15 minutes or something. So,
no, we don't.
We're talking about height.
let's talk about genres that are important that Jacob can get in on. So tell us about the genres of whiskey.
Oh, there's a lot of genres of whiskey.
Lagavulin, it's utter shit. Don't drink it.
Good and bad.
No. Oh, that
I'm
was
not a
poison.
big fan of peaty Scotch.
Oh, it was terrible.
But even Scotch, which is a subgenre of whiskey, has its own subgenres. There's Highland and Lowland.
Space sides.
Right?
But the
It's
main
funny we didn't even.
Yeah, but I would say the main genres of whiskey are, I mean, and Jacob, you can correct me, but it's American whiskey, Scotch whiskey, bourbon, and Irish whiskey. Those are like.
Where does Canadian fit in there?
Oh, there is Canadian whiskey.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
There's Japanese too. The Japanese are getting into it.
Yeah, but nobody
Yeah,
cares.
but it's got its own name that I cannot remember right now. And
Yeah,
there's
Japanese whiskey is supposed to be
which is
very
like
good.
a really weird, like agave whiskey, which I don't even know if people consider whiskey or not. But
I was gonna say, like, doesn't that make it tequila? Like,
well, yeah, but it's agave, but everything else is done as if it's a whiskey.
right. Like
It's a really like.
Okay.
Is it a whiskey based on the ingredients or the method that is produced?
Both.
Both. Well, and
So then it's
all.
so then it's a tequila. No.
Well, so like rye whiskey, for instance, is, as the name would imply, it's rye heavy. That's where they distill it with.
Well, and also like all bourbon is whiskey, but not all whiskey is bourbon
Because bourbon has corn, right? That's the
and
defining
also,
factor.
you have to have, like, there's like a river in Kentucky that has a very specific mineral makeup, and to be real bourbon, you have to draw your water from that.
So
it's
that's
it's like the French with champagne.
I was
very-
exactly,
or
like,
Italians
it's only
with
bourbon if it comes
Parmesan,
from Bourbon, Texas. Otherwise, it's
right.
sparkling whiskey. So
Parmesan cheese in
It's a bit
Italy. It
more
has to be
complicated
these
than that.
specific things for it to be Parmesan.
oh god,
Not everyone.
I'm
abides
just glad we got to make that reference. I wanted that one in my back pocket just in case, So
And there's
I just
malt
didn't expect-
whiskey, and there's blended. Like I said before, there's single
shaken,
malt.
sthered.
Single malt
there's-
like, is that a big thing in other whiskeys besides Scotch?
What malt?
Yeah, the single malt or.
Well,
like
yeah, single malt tends to, like your Dewars, they tend to the Scotch side.
Yeah.
But there's
'Cause I've
others.
never
There's like
heard it
Cox.
referenced anywhere except in Scotch for like the malts.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think they're pretty well segregated to Scotches. Because even like Johnny Walker, which is a blend.
Ugh. Fuck that shit.
Yeah, it's decent.
Fireball.
I like Black Label. Black Label's also
Black Label
very
is what I was
good.
thinking.
Black Label's probably the best one for me. Black and Gold. I like Gold.
I've not tried gold.
I haven't had Blue yet, even though everyone says it's overrated. But at some point,
talking
I have a bottle that was purchased as a gift. So whether it's overrated or not doesn't matter to me now.
The most I've ever paid for any single liquor at a bar was a Macallan 21. It was like $75 for an ounce.
Oh, that was probably
Wow.
worth it.
It wasn't.
Macallan, really? Macallan's
Macallan
nice.
is Scotch's go, even though it's really popular. It's kind of on the low side of things.
I have a Macallan. I
Well,
can't
the old
remember what year
Scotch
it
is
was.
Great, but
Yeah, you'll find
Yeah, I
people
think
who
I've
will
had-
tell you that Macallan's kind of like your normie if you think is good Scotch versus.
I've had
Sorry,
two
you're a normie
whiskeys,
now.
and that's like
I
Jack
like it.
Daniels
So
and,
whether it's normie or not, I like it. But I'm not paying like for the 18 and 21 year. Like I'm fine 15 and under.
so I actually got to see a $10,000 bottle of Scotch. It was a Belvini 40.
Right.
Like
That's like,
my ex-wife used to work at a liquor store, and the owner bought 2 bottles of Belvini 40.
for himself. Just thinking he
himself.
would actually sell it.
No, for himself.
Well, yeah, one for a collector's item and one to actually drink. That's like the Pappy Van Winkle. I mean, it's not Pappy gets not quite that high, but it gets pretty fucking high.
that's also the reference. Like that, I had to look that up when I watched Silicon Valley, and they try to bribe a character to take job interviews, and then he gets a bottle of Pappy Van Winkle, and it's like, oh, finally they're getting serious. Like, what the fuck is Pappy Van Winkle? I had to
It's a
look it up. I was like, oh,
whiskey.
okay, that's expensive.
By all accounts, it's a fairly good whiskey. It's just not
I thought it was
worth
bourbon.
the markup.
I think they don't sell it at markup, right? They sell it at normal price, and then
No, they sell it for retail, and then everyone else marks it up.
Yeah,
it's a bourbon.
I mean, I've had two whiskeys, Jack Daniels and Southern Comfort. And those are both normal, I guess. Just normal, like Southern Comfort. Do you know that one?
Yeah, that's a liqueur. That's not actually liquor.
Right.
Oh.
And Jack Daniels? That genre definition there?
Right.
I'm not very good at keeping those straight, honestly.
Liqueurs
I think it's flavored.
They're like liquor, especially whiskey, is purely distilled, where in aged in barrels and other things, where liqueurs are, they add other parts to the process.
They also it's usually the flavoring liqueur.
Yeah.
The sweet stuff, your limoncellos, your Cointreaux.
It's a mix of whiskey
flavoring instead of actually like imbuing it with flavoring from different types of barrels.
It says here that it's like a mix of whiskey, peach liqueur, orange, vanilla, sugar, and cinnamon.
SoCo, yeah. SoCo's like its own mixed drink, and then you pour it into Coke, and people just go apeshit.
Man,
you should drink Southern Comfort with Sprite. It's very good.
Southern Comfort's fine, but Southern Comfort's like you're in college and you just want to get drunk for a while, and so you just order SoCo.
That's generally 100 when I drink. That's usually how it works.
Well, because there's different levels to that, because now we're talking about college genre. If you actually have the ability to go out to a bar versus if you're bringing people into your place and you've got a tub where it's just fruit punch and like Devil Springs and you're trying to kill everyone.
What's a Devil Spring?
Devil Springs is it's almost pure. Well, I shouldn't say almost, but it's like very close to pure alcohol by comparison to most things, because it's like 160 proof.
That
so
sounds terrible.
It's basically like drinking rubbing alcohol, but that and Everclear.
That's why you dilute it with 25
I've heard of
gallons
Everclear.
worth of fruit juice.
Yeah, one of those two. I forget if it's Everclear or Devil Springs. One of the two tells you on the bottle, don't drink it straight. Like specifically on the bottle will tell you this is for mixing, don't drink it straight. People will do it anyway. It doesn't matter because
they're morons in college.
Well, it doesn't take college. There will be people.
Right. You can be dumb past that. People who don't go to college also usually dumb. Like not universally, but
it's relatively it's fairly cheap. You could buy like a handle of it for like $20 and just dump it into your jungle juice and you're set for the night and everyone's dying. And it's a good time.
I was so boring in college. I fell off a couch at one beer.
One of the worst things I ever saw in my entire life was I was at this bar and these two guys got in a bad shot off to see who could like take the worst shot.
It's just a waste of your night.
I know. But the winner, like the guy the person who
winner. Quotation marks.
So the winning shot, so the guy wouldn't take anymore, was Mccormick's Scotch, which comes in a like 2-liter jug, plastic, and it's like $15 for Scotch. It's so terrible.
Is that McCormick like the spice maker?
Yes, but it's a different McCormick, I believe.
I kind of expected like this is going to be Scotch with like gravy mixed into it or something.
Right. Yeah, I was waiting for. I was like, wait, that's it. It was just like this alcohol is just so bad. He threw in the.
It's just really bad alcohol. There's nothing disgusting in it. It's not like.
Yeah, well, I mean, there are certain things like I could never do that because there are certain alcohols that just like drinking it straight, whatever quality it is. Gin, vodka,
gin. I love gin.
Like, basically, if it's clear liquor, tequila is the one exception.
Oh, I cannot do tequila.
But I don't drink it. I don't drink it just straight. Like gin cocktails are delightful. It's my favorite cocktails.
I mean, gin is better with like mix of other things. Like gin and tonics are great, but like gin itself is fine.
I mean, on a descending order, it would be tequila, gin, vodka. Vodka for me is just like right out.
Well, tequila is good to mix in other things, but I drank just a little bit of tequila straight just to see what it was like, and it actually made me throw up. It tasted so bad, and it was decent quality tequila.
And I know people who love it. They just like they'll sip on tequila, like tequila on the rocks all night.
Well, like if it's the brown tequila or whatever, that darker stuff, like that's better. It tastes closer to like bourbons or whiskeys to me.
when you was it your first tequila of the night, or had you been?
No, I was straight sober. We got a whole bunch of things, and we're just like, I want to try a whole bunch, tiny little bits amount of it, so that I know more what to expect when I mix it. And
no, I'm not a tequila aficionado, but I think the clearer ones are supposed to be the mixing ones, and the browner, the añejos, are like the sipping ones because they're more expensive, whether or not that matters.
I mean, that totally makes sense.
I feel like that's what it is.
Because like straight tequila was so gross, but putting like a tequila sunrise, that was fantastic.
Well, sure. I mean, I can drink stuff with vodka in it if it's mixed.
Screwdrivers. Talk about cheap.
I've never actually had one, but now I have with vodka.
I actually can't really do screwdrivers. I much prefer what's the other one with champagne? Why am I blanking on the name?
Mimosas.
Thank you.
I fucking love mimosas.
Mimosas are delightful.
There's a place here in Tulsa that they serve their mimosas in like pint glasses. They're huge. It's like 80% champagne.
There was a place in Long Island that had brunch where you would get unlimited mimosas. They don't do it anymore, but I had a good time.
Because Jacob stopped by.
No, I've been there more than once, and they stick by it. They will keep bringing you fucking mimosas.
We have a thing here called snaps,
and
it's disgusting.
Schnapps?
I linked it in.
No, it does say snaps, but I don't know if it's.
Yeah, I can't really find. Like, I was looking in the text to see if there's something American I could equate it to, but
we have schnapps here.
Yeah, it's schnapps.
You have schnapps. It's disgusting.
Yeah,
depends on the schnapps.
I don't know if I've ever drank it that straight, because it's like you usually drink it with some kind of flavoring as well, right? So like peach schnapps or whatever.
Straight is
no.
I'll shoot Rumplemans.
You drink it straight. Usually,
but it'd be like a liqueur, right? It's like mixed,
it has syrup
flavored,
in it or something like that. Because
it's flavored with like spices or herbs, but that's it. No syrup or anything.
Okay, it's different in schnapps. It's like like Rumpleman schnapps is like drinking dinner mints. It's fantastic.
It's very harsh. It's like kind of like vodka in a way, but I don't know. It's more dry feeling when you drink it. It's not. I don't like it.
This is a different thing. So because this is specifically Danish and Swedish, apparently. So not narrowing down your country of origin at all.
Nope.
For a small shot
Sweden. We know it's Sweden.
Right. A strong alcoholic beverage taken during the course of a meal. So it seems it's probably a kind of alcohol, but it's even more about, the ritual, for lack of a better word. Than
it's a very big Easter thing.
So that's why we got confused, because we don't do that necessarily. Like, if you're going to drink, you're going to drink. We don't call it anything like, we're not having sherries before bed or whatever. We're not having snaps.
That's because we're not
before. Yes,
should be.
We're Americans. Like, I want to get drunk fast. That's why we got $20 for 10 ounces of pure alcohol diluted in a 10-gallon drum, so we don't die. You drink 3 of those and you're good. So,
I mean, we drink a lot in Denmark. Like, there's like
we have
drink too much. Too much.
Yes, your behavior has signaled that many times.
What do you mean? I barely drink.
Here you go. Here's your bottom line. The word snaps also has the same meaning as German schnapps, in the sense of any strong alcoholic drink. So that's not fucking confusing. So,
great. So everything except
it's like not
beer.
Budweiser.
Next time you're drinking straight whiskey, you'd be like, "What do you got?" "Oh, I got some schnapps. Want some?" "Yeah, I love schnapps." "Oh God."
Why did you lie to me? If you look at the technical definition,
right?
That's how you lose friends and make enemies.
Okay, I think we should close because we've been doing a lot. So plug whatever we care about.
We don't care about anything.
Broken Jars, Broken Jars, patreon.com/Broken Jars if you want to get on the Discord, Broken Jars Broadcasting at gmail.com. I am at Jacob Ingles on Twitter. And that's about it for me.
We promise none of this money goes to any of our drinking habits.
True.
Yeah, that's true.
Which maybe we should look into that. Should we do a Patreon tier for that one? No.
I'd be okay with that.
Yeah. Hold on. If someone wants to pay us, like, you will drink this thing just to see your reactions. Okay.
I'll do that.
No, I'm hard out on that. That's crazy talk. Like, you're gonna get those gravy whiskey shots you were talking about, but I will have a drink with you if you hit a certain Patreon tier. So
yeah, if you want to watch us watch something, or you want to watch us drink something, let us know what you're interested in.